So I will now call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Directors, March 11th, 2025. Okay. Sorry, I have to log back in. Okay, now I really welcome you. I got it, thank you. Good evening. Welcome to our Board of Directors March 25th, 2025 meeting. Thank you to those attending in person tonight and those staying engaged by watching our recording at a later time or joining us tonight via the Zoom link. The public is reminded that if they wish to speak during community comment, they will need to fill out a speaker form located in the lobby on the table and turn it in to Board Secretary Kim Colvin, seated at the end on my left. Comments will take place during the Comments will take place during the designated community comment portion of our agenda. Before we move into the agenda, I want to take a moment and introduce those seated at the table with me. To my right, we have Superintendent Matt Degner, Directors Sean Eystone and Charlie Eastham. I am Vice President Molly Abraham, and to my left are Directors Jane Finch, Mitch Lingo, and Board Secretary Kim Colvin. So with that, we are ready for our education showcase tonight. I'll let Matt maybe make a few comments first.
Sure. We'd like to invite our Twain Tigers to the podium here to share what they've been up to at Twain Elementary in regards to our English language learner instruction. We had an opportunity to come visit their classroom here the week before spring break. I know several of the board members were able to attend, and just super proud and impressed with what they were able to show us that day and with their kiddos. So I'll turn it over to Principal Kirkman here and let her get us started.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Teresa Kirkman, the principal at Twain Elementary, and joining me tonight are Betsy Slaughter, Yasmin Zafar, and Carol Bell, our ELL team at Twain. In the spring of last year, the Twain ELL team came to me with an idea on how to strengthen our ELL instruction for our Twain Tigers. I didn't know if it would just magically pick up. Okay. I won't redo the introductions. So this idea wasn't a reaction to poor performance on our ELPA assessment, but rather just an idea on how to strengthen things that were already going really well. And we were celebrating exceptional growth in 2 of the 4 domains, reading and writing on those ELPA 21 assessments. And so really the whole point of this new model was just to strengthen the work that had already been happening with our ELL students by giving us a structure to be more intentional with each of the language domains, and also it closely aligned with the work that we were already doing with NASAT. So as educators, you know, we're always looking for those continuous improvement opportunities, and this just really seemed to be a good fit to just really ensure that students were highly engaged and just really receiving that well-rounded language instruction. So I'll turn it over to our team that truly creates the magic in this model.
So good evening, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to share with all of you tonight. We're excited to share how Twain is improving English language learner instruction with this model that we believe to be more focused and more effective as well.
Our goal with this change was to provide more rigorous and meaningful instruction and specialized instruction to our ELL students. By restructuring our approach, we are ensuring that each language domain of reading, writing, listening, and speaking gets focused attention that it needs to acquire a second language.
Previously, each ELL teacher had to cover all 4 domains in 30 minutes. This was limiting their depth of instruction and made it challenging for students to give the focus practices they needed to learn each domain.
So we've taken this departmentalized approach this year. So each of our 3 ELL teachers specializes in one domain. So Betsy focuses on speaking and listening, Yasmin on writing, and myself on reading. Students rotate through these sessions, receiving 15 minutes of focused instruction in each area. And the shift allows teachers to develop deep expertise in their assigned domain, leading to a more effective experience and instruction for the kids. It also ensures that they get this targeted, high-quality learning experience. And additionally, a key benefit of this model is that all students are pulled at the same time. All of our ELL students are pulled at the same time, which reduces all the disruptions to the classroom schedule when we need to make changes to our groupings. We've also been able to make changes. We've lived this out without affecting or interrupting their intervention times, their title or small group times within the classroom as well. So it just in general has made a much more aligned instruction experience.
So what does this look like in practice? First, students get 45 minutes of specialized ELL instruction instead of just 30 minutes with very fast transitions between groups. So second, now we have 15 minutes of push-in or pull-out support at the end of that rotation. So ELL teachers are able to collaborate better with the classroom teachers. We can help provide small group instruction to newcomers, and we can also provide individualized help to students who might need a little bit extra support. And we can also monitor students who have exited the ELL program.
So when we decided to think about this model, it wasn't just a structural shift in our schedule. We wanted to be deeply rooted into research-based best practices. So we aligned all our SciHub models with an ASAP framework to ensure high-quality instructions. We made sure that we provide clear objectives and frequent assessments to keep our learning focused. Second, we maximize engagement through lively pace. The students get to shift classrooms every 15 minutes, different teachers, different activities. We have very interactive activities in all classrooms and strong routines. Third, we structure content in ways that are deep in understanding through chunking, structure practice, and application of complex skills. And finally, we incorporated proven strategies like previewing, reviewing, organizing students' interactions, just some of the key elements of effective ELL instruction.
So research shows that young learners have short attention spans. By keeping each session to 15 minutes in different rooms, we maximize the students' engagement while reinforcing the learning across domains. For example, a student might learn a new vocabulary in reading, apply it in writing, and then practice it in speaking, all in the same day. Another major benefit is that this model strengthens collaboration between ELL and classroom teachers, helping all of the students succeed. The push-in time allows us to continue to monitor our exited ELL students, as well as ensure they stay on track with their peers and provide appropriate support when they're struggling to keep up.
Okay, so in closing, this new model has already shown promising results in keeping students engaged, strengthening their language skills, and improving collaboration. Classroom teachers have shared that ELL students have shown higher participation and collaboration in classroom discussions, and we look forward to measure our students' growth over the year in the general classroom and on their ELPA scores, which we get back in May, I think. So that's all. Thanks.
So, sir, go ahead. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity just to share, just really the day-to-day work at Twain. This isn't something that was just prepared especially for the board. It's just every day good instruction happening. And so, certainly appreciate those of you that were able to come out and see it firsthand. I mean, you're always welcome. Just give us a call, and even don't give us a call, just show up. We will definitely find times for you to come into our classroom. So thanks so much for being here, and thanks for all your work.
I just want to make a few comments, and other directors may want to as well. But that was surely the highlight of my week, to be able to come see you, having spent my career with big kids. How you manage all these little kids, doing all that stuff, it was really, really great to see. I'm super impressed with how you did it. Your transitions were so fast from one class to the next. I mean, the kids knew exactly what to do. It was great to see. I really respect the work you're doing.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I couldn't believe how orderly and efficient all of it was, and just how engaged and focused those students were. I'm really glad to hear that they're participating more in their regular classrooms as a result of this. And I'm really impressed that this was a grassroots effort, not only for the teachers who thought of this, but also for you, Principal Kirkman, for being the type of leader who develops other leaders like this. And so I think that says a lot about your leadership. So I was really impressed. I honestly could not tell that this was an ELL class. I think these kids can write better than my children could, 10 years older than that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a really thrilling and exhilarating field trip for me anyway. I really appreciate you inviting us and and hosting us when we came. Kids are wonderful. They're just wonderful. One of the things that strikes me about the approach you've developed is that the student-teacher ratio goes way down. For the times when the kids, at least the 7 that I observed in the classroom, you had a ratio of 3 teachers to 7 kids, which is really remarkable, and one of the things we try to improve on all the time. So I really commend all of you for this work, and I'm sure you'll see great results as the kids get to their assessment periods.
Just genuinely out of curiosity, how many languages are in the building or within your ELL students? Would you softball? I know, not to put you on the spot or anything. 5 to 7. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We really appreciate you and your work and coming to talk to us tonight. Community comment? No community, okay. Next item up is we need to approve our agenda for this evening. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'd move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Secretary Colvin, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Okay. Our next item is the consent agenda. First, were there any questions on any of the bills from those directors that reviewed them?
Nope.
Okay. Any items that anyone wants to pull from the consent agenda? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Derek Colvin, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Our next item is committee reports. Director Lingo, do you want to talk about the operations meeting last week?
1 second. Didn't we talk about, I talked about.
We talked about it, but I discussed this with Board Secretary Colvin. We talked a little bit about it, but it wasn't as part of a committee report. So I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to say.
Okay. Well, last week we talked about the bus, or 2 weeks ago we talked about the buses. I went through it fairly substantially at that point, but the main gist of what's going on is that we put out an RFP for busing. The only people that returned a quote for us was our current bus provider. And we discussed a little bit of just the high cost of even starting a busing program. If we were to do that, we'd have to go out and buy a fleet of buses. And then you put more people on payroll, you have to have director of transportation, everything, the whole 9 yards. So we went ahead and we thought that the RFP did the best for the serving our district, so.
Thank you. Next up is policy review. Director Eystone, you want to talk about the 600 series?
Yep. So 600 series is going to be our kind of our first pass at it today. Won't take action on them today. There's only 4 kind of minor changes in there. There's the first one was we took the goals, the student learning goals, basically out of the policy and just referenced back to some of our other guiding documents, our portrait of a graduate and the district strategic plan. So they're not outlined in the policy, but they're referenced elsewhere. Due to something at the state, we changed the units for some of the, I can't remember if it was in the junior high or the high school units for graduation. There's a new form in there for guardians to fill out if they wish to prohibit a student from checking out specific library materials. And the last one is basically codifying something that was already happening with our internet usage on district devices, that it is being logged. Most parents already know about it because they're getting a Securely report, but that's what the Securely is doing. It's basically logging and tracking what the students are doing on the district devices. But now it actually has that line in the policy to be very transparent that it's happening. That's all the changes in the 600s. Any questions on those? Okay. So then the next one is the 500 series, which we will be voting on. If you remember the last meeting, we brought the 500s forward, and we approved most of them. There were a handful that we had some questions that the admin team took back and we're kind of looking into. They came back with, there was a couple of minor changes from what was initially there, but most of it was just sort of clarification on those handful of policies. You can see them in the agenda, I think on the admin content, so I don't think anybody other than folks up here can actually see that. But there's very minor changes. Basically, there's a statement in there about when we would or wouldn't waive eligibility for students that are transferring in. And I'm trying to think, I wrote some really minor notes. There's not a lot of big changes there. We struck out a line from one of the policies that was kind of confusing the way it was worded, and it was just easier to strike the line altogether. And there was another kind of a list of examples in our restraint policy that whenever you have a list, it sort of seems like it's all-inclusive or it's impossible to be all-inclusive, so we just struck the list of examples there just for some clarity purposes. So again, not a lot of changes to those 5 that we skipped over last time, so they will come back to take action on tonight.
Any questions or comments, any of that?
I was just noticing the 502.3 student expression and student publication. Students who walk out may not return back to the building for the remainder of that school day. I know, I think someone in the policy meeting brought that up. They were questioning whether or not that was a good idea or not. I assume there was some discussion, and we decided to stick with the policy as is. Is that how that went?
Superintendent Danger can speak to it, but the long and short of it is once they, they're off-site and, no longer under our supervision, we don't know what has been going on. And it's just safer and easier to tell them up front that they can't come back.
Yeah, makes
Right.
sense to me. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you wanted more than that.
Yeah, I think probably the thing I failed to also say in P&G, it's also a disruption to the school day for the other students, right? So it's kind of twofold, probably the constant disruption of leaving and then re-entering, but then overall, I think the prevailing reason is just the multitude of safety concerns that come from leaving campus and then the potential of coming back.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Director Eystone. Any other questions, comments? Okay, our next item is a presentation on RAM staffing and class size. And you are walking over to the podium. Mr. Proud.
I'll just fill some space for Nick while he gets set up here, but it's the time of year where we are working through our staffing model for the upcoming school year. And so Mr. Proud's going to go ahead and share some information with you here about what we're looking at for our class size and staffing levels at the elementary next year, and then considerations for middle and high school as well. And then probably just continue to build all of our knowledge around our weighted resource allocation model and the factors that go into that, and how we continue to evolve that model and commit to that staffing process.
Thank you, Superintendent Degner, and good evening. We're going to highlight three specific parts in looking at some adjustments related to our RAM and just some of the things that we had done last year. And a lot of that, I think, maybe got lost a little bit, some of the work within all the budget work we were also doing, that we made some substantial changes and things to look at how we make these determinations. So we're just going to take a moment, look at that again. We'll review some of the staffing that's going on at our elementary and secondary buildings and the online program, and then just have a time for feedback and questions. So as we look at the weighted resource allocation model, and this really applies at both levels, but it's more predominantly used for class size at the elementary, we look at all sorts of individual factors. Basically, each kid in every school gets a score related to the services they need, whether it's special education services, English language learners, like we just got that opportunity to hear from some of the folks at Twain, free and reduced lunch status, McKinney-Vento status, which is homelessness for those. And that creates a weight per student. Those weights were determined with working with our administrative team to determine, like, well, what are these barriers and how much of a barrier to education are those things for each student? And then it creates a greater graph. And we look at that, and it takes all those factors, looks at a weight per student, then we look at the overall weight for the school. And then also that helps us determine a number of things, including class size. But as I've kind of talked about previously related to RAM, it also influences support staff. It influences some of the other staffing that we do. It's looked at a little differently at the secondary level. But I did want to put this, we didn't link this in the presentation because it does have some more identifiable kind of information. But as you look in this, I mean, this is, you can see the average weight per student within a building. Now, the thing that we have worked on is not only is it about the average weight per student, but also then how many students exist within a building and the total weight within that building. So you can see over here then, and I didn't sort these, I should have, you can see then, well, what is the total weight of the students in there? So it's looking at all the students plus those factors, and it creates that. So then when we look at how we apply this, we really look at those two middle columns that you see up there about the head count plus the weighted sums and the average weight per student, and we factor those two things together to come up with our different levels. It's really, I think, a pretty sophisticated way to look at this versus maybe how we've applied it previously, and it gives us a really accurate picture of where the needs are in our various buildings. So all those factors come together to then create our levels. I'm going to pop back into our presentation. So one of the things that we then do is that creates our levels. And for this upcoming year, here are some of the proposed adjustments we'd like to make. I think over the last 2 years, we've had to increase elementary class size. As you all know, as we've had to do some things with the budget, we've had to make some reductions, and some of those have occurred at the elementary level. We've done a lot of good work related to our budget, and we're in a place that we can start to maybe crawl back a little bit and improve some of these class sizes. So we've been working as a team to look at that, and you'll see that we're making some subtle adjustments here at RAM 1. Some of the things that I would point out is the splitting of first grade out down to the 25 there. Previously, that had also been at the same level as 26 with our second grade. These are, again, aspirational numbers, what we're trying to get to as we look at this. Some of the other changes are at the RAM 2 level. One thing, Executive Director Eliza Proctor from the elementary schools isn't here today, but her and I had talked quite frequently. We had our first and second up to 28, and that was for a large number of our buildings. That was something we really wanted to look at, so we were able to make some adjustments there, move down to that 26 as an aspirational size, and then move this to 30 instead of at 32. So those are some of the subtle adjustments that you'll see. It is going to have a impact. We'll have to invest a little bit back into our elementary schools in regards to FTE, but we think it's an investment that will be very valuable as we continue our work forward. At the middle school level, we made a lot of changes last year and a lot of staffing movement, but we're kind of tinkering still a little bit. But overall, we did want to provide some additional staffing to look at math. That was an area of data that we wanted to continue to make some improvements on. Lucas Potacek has been working with the middle school principals related to how they'd like to tackle math support at their school. So we have allocated a little extra FTE to support that. We continue to look at how we can offer as many classes as possible to not have as many kids in study halls. Study halls are not a great learning environment. I mean, some kids appreciate those, but generally speaking, we'd rather have kids in classes. So the more we can do that, the better. And then we always continue to monitor our core areas to make sure we maintain those aspirational class sizes. I think that are in the 600 series, actually, looking at those core areas, making sure that we're in the ranges that we'd like to be in at the middle school level. Next is the high school, and this is a kind of a much more difficult staffing puzzle. I see Director Abraham kind of nodding her head there, because it's all dependent on what the kids sign up for. So each year, it's not just about the number of kids that are there, it's about what are they there, how many are there, and what have they signed up for. We feel really good about the consistent class sizes around our kind of core subject areas heading into next year, similar to what we reported in the enrollment report. We see those two things going on. We see those numbers being consistent again next year. The next part about the reductions, we again at the high school level, we're kind of finding opportunities over the last couple of years to make some reductions, and now we're looking at where are some places we may need to make some subtle changes. Maybe we weren't offering a course at a particular school or some courses, and we need to make sure we're offering that for the equitable opportunities, and we continue to do that. And at our high school level, and this is kind of prevalent across our system, but we have seen even increased growth at the high school level of a growing English as a second language population. Continue to look at how we can support that in our high schools, increase number of ELL classes where the students are getting pulled out because many of the students are beginners and they come to us and high school age and no English skills whatsoever, and so we need to support that. And then also sheltered courses, where I'm not the expert to speak on those, but those are very specific courses that are in content areas. A lot of times it may be a sheltered biology or a sheltered math class or wherever it may be, where they're helping provide that language support along with the content. So we continue to see some increases there. And then the online learning program, we continue to evaluate the student enrollment at the elementary level. A lot of this is dependent on, hey, are you interested? We found over the last couple of years, the younger the students, we have less interest, but kind of in the upper elementary through our secondary, we continue to have some positive increases. So that's encouraging. To the point we've kind of talked about, the online program is basically a one-room schoolhouse. We've got one teacher that teaches everything within the subject area. We're getting to a point we might have to expand that a little bit in language arts and math because the numbers continue to increase, which is good. Our 7-12 format, though, continues to accommodate the program nicely, so what that is a lot of, if you're a math teacher, you're teaching everything from Math 7 to, basically not quite AP Calc, but a high-end math class as well. So that's quite a challenge, but the teachers do a nice job managing that. So that's the kind of the overview here. Happy to go back to any of those slides or answer any questions that you may have.
It's a great presentation, very, very nice.
Thank you.
Nick, I just want to make a comment, I guess, about the elementary school RAM method that we're using. As I recall, about a year or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, we looked at some data that showed that the RAM method was actually having a positive influence on proficiency for students that were in the lower range RAM schools, a little bit lower class sizes. So I wonder if we could continue to look at that as we use this new or this adjusted RAM allocation method to see if we're still having an effect, perhaps a better effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we could easily look at and make some correlations. I don't want to work with, Executive Director Eliza Proctor related to the elementary data, but absolutely that's something we can certainly look at.
Okay, thank you.
I have a lot of questions,
Okay.
actually. So I guess I can start with the elementary level and kind of going off of what Director Easton was just asking. The RAM designations, this is, the schools changed from, in their designations. Was that, I think that was a year ago that we
Yep.
did that? Okay. And I was just wondering have we tweaked them again, or have they pretty much stayed the same? Are all of them RAM 1, RAM 2, RAM 3 schools, are they the same as they were last year? And have there been any has there been any thought to sort of rethinking it? I guess when I was looking at the table that you put up there, just briefly looking at it, the average weight, I saw Kirkwood at the top there.
Yep.
So I guess that's specifically what I was wondering about. Some of these schools that used to be RAM 1 that are now RAM 2, how are we doing there? Is there any thought to changing that at all?
Well, and that's where we have, and one of the things that's kind of a little bit of it's hard to see on this graph because it doesn't just say specifically, like we're not just looking at this particular column for what's making the determination, because Kirkwood is the highest maybe per average, but you would find over here on this list, when you look at the total weight, they're actually a little further down. So what we do is put those two things together and look at kind of, it's a correlation between the two of them to then determine your kind of rank order. That's where you would see a lot of times in both charts, Alexander, by all accounts, would probably be our highest need building because it has a high total weight, because it does take into size. Because one thing that we've discovered over time was it's not just about the average per kid, it's also about how many students in a building have barriers that they're experiencing, whatever it may be, and so that's something we have to figure in. It's like taking that total number of students who have some factors and looking at what the average is. Now, one thing that we do that helps is using Kirkwood as an example. Director Finch is, you can see this is, it's a heat map and it has different colors and different depths. So then we can look and see, oh, there's at this particular grade level, there's a little more need. So then that's something we can apply to. That's information we can share with the principal and different pieces that we look at. One of the nice parts about this is it's fluid and it updates all the time. It's directly linked into the work we do with Infinite Campus. So if new students come, it influences this. So as we talk about changing levels, yeah, that's something that could happen over time. When we reviewed again this year, we felt like it was still pretty consistent to what we had last year, but it is something that we'll consistently look at and explore. And one thing that I think is important, and Director Eastham brought up, is making sure, is the data reflecting this? Are we allocating the kind of the way we need to? and I have some other charts that get into it. Some things too we look at is, yes, they may not be here, but Kirkwood's kind of a unique example of if you actually look at their average class size, it's one of our lowest. Part of it is because it's a smaller building, so they're kind of benefiting, but that's something we look at as well. So when we make a decision on if they're close, but they're a 1-section or 2-section building, maybe we tip that over a little bit sooner. We did that this year. We added a kindergarten section at Kirkwood because of that. We knew probably have some need coming in there. So that's just another piece that we look at in the puzzle.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just kind of curious, like 1 year into
Yeah.
this, like if you were
No,
seeing a need for any changes with our.
Yeah, we use this all the time, and this is something we reflect back on, as I've mentioned. So, I mean, even really the Twain example earlier today, when you look at some of the needs there, I mean, you saw 3 ELL teachers for a relatively small building. That's something we want to look at. So we look at, okay, what is the total number of students who need ELL services, and if then it's a building that we see has a greater need overall, we may lean more towards, well, let's have that 3rd teacher instead of just having 2. So those are all those factors that we take into consideration as we look at all these.
Great, great. Okay. So then moving on to the secondary schools, I'm just, I wonder if you could give us a little bit more details about what our aspirational class size is for our middle schools, and then a little more details on what those staffing increases will look like in those schools.
Which staffing? So like the math piece at the middle school?
Yeah, exactly. And then you mentioned there would be some subtle increases at the high school.
Yeah, the subtle increases at the high school, a lot of times it can be, we added, for one example, we added a social studies teacher at Liberty High School. Brady's well aware of this. As we were working through, there were some courses that they weren't offering that the other 2 high schools were, and part of it was just simply not having the staff to be able to do that because you have to make some decisions. So we added a teacher there. In a couple cases, it may just be, one of the unique things about a high school. A lot of times you may have somebody who's been teaching 0.6 and now they're willing to be a 1.0, so we'll add a couple sections of something in that can make a big difference. So those are kind of the subtle changes. At the middle school level, we added a halftime teacher essentially at each one of the buildings to focus in on the math support. Each one of the principals worked with Lucas Potacek to determine how they wanted to use that within their building, and then we've allocated accordingly. So we're working through that piece. The aspirational class size, I believe, I'm going off the top of my head because I don't have the chart in front of me. I believe 32 is, thank you.
Yeah, in the 600 series, it's still reflective of, this will probably be a change we actually bring to you at the next meeting because our RAM levels in there don't speak to the adjustments we made the last couple of years. When you look at the elementary numbers, Director Finch, and it also speaks to grades like 3 through 6, where we know now it should be a grade band of 6 through 8. But for grades 7 and 8, it's stated at 26 to 32, and then grades 9, 12, 28 to 34 are those stated goals.
Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome.
That's unless I'll just go. So this is one of the questions I've just had overall, and I didn't ask last year, so I'm going to ask it this year. One of the in the literature surrounding weighted resource allocation models, one of the chief criticisms of it, or one of the thoughts on why a lot of times they don't work, involves that it doesn't address experienced teachers transferring out of those the buildings that need the more resources. Do you find this to be an issue at our RAM 1 buildings with teachers transferring out into other buildings, or?
No. I mean, one of the things we're really fortunate, we have, I think, some of the most dedicated teachers, and they become very committed to the school. So you think about some of our schools that have maybe some of the more challenging students or difficult situations, you'll see that a lot of those people have been in those buildings for numerous years. We were talking this morning that I think there's a number of teachers that helped open Alexander that are still there and proudly there. And that's some students who experience a number of barriers. So we're really fortunate in regards to that. The only times we see people moving, it's more for personal reasons or maybe to be at the school or closer to the school where their own children go. But generally speaking, we have a pretty stable staff.
Thank you. The next question is, under the current model of RAM, this year, roughly 50% of the classroom sections in our what we deemed the most needy buildings had classrooms of 19 or fewer students, while two of our designated buildings as the most needy did not have a classroom of under 22 students. And in one of the buildings, it had two classrooms of 25 kindergartners and one classroom of 26 kindergartners. In the future, how does this frame our mindset surrounding the boundary, even elementary boundaries or ramming, or how we staff throughout the school year when we have these kind of jumps, especially in the kindergarten classrooms?
Well, I'll speak to the RAM portion of it. One of the pieces related to RAM, one of the reasons we're proposing some of these subtle adjustments is I think we'll see some improved average class sizes within the RAM 1 schools and also some of the stuff at the RAM 2. We were pretty strategic in how we were trying to do this while being kind of fiscally responsible. I think that's one of the challenges, the push and pulls we've run into the last couple of years is working through, well, we reduced 7 elementary teachers last year. That was difficult, so you have to make some challenges. So we're trying to bring a little bit of that back into the system. So we'll probably see some improve. So you're right. There are some buildings that were a little bit higher maybe than we would like, and hopefully we're able to move some of those in a positive direction by putting some FTE back into our elementary classrooms.
Yeah, I would just add on, Director Lingo, RAM gives us aspirational goals, right? And we use that word aspirational because we know that it's not achievable in every sense, but it kind of sets a baseline for where we want to be and how we can effectively manage class size. But it doesn't address all inefficiencies. I think actually an iteration of the model RAM that I've seen, during my time here is what Nick was showing in terms of building size, trying to account for that. Like where you see Hoover, if you would have just looked at the need column, they're about maybe third of the way down, right, on need, but you can see they're now a RAM 1, right? So where we tried to account for intensity just on the sheer number of students, they're also trying to work through with the level of need they had. And so that's a way I think we're trying to navigate, okay, how do you balance need with sheer size in comparison to maybe buildings that benefit from having a smaller, more inefficient, model where some of those class sizes just naturally fall below those RAM thresholds. So I think we try to keep looking for smart ways, to work on and improve the RAM where we can. But I also, wouldn't want to pretend to say that it addresses all inefficiencies in our system, right? And I think that's a limiter on what it can do and where we're able to make some of those staffing decisions.
Another question for you. Since we're looking at strategic investments in math and English language arts in the secondary, I know that part of the way our secondary systems get evaluated by the state in the report card is science. And then there is going to be some changes. I don't even know if they've been finalized yet on CTE, career technical education credentials, working credentials. How does that frame any changes in secondary staffing, or is it, or?
It depends. I mean, some of it, one of the nice things is a lot of the work that we're able to do related to that, and if Lucas were here, he could speak to it, is a lot of the work-based learning and some of those other opportunities. We don't necessarily have to invest additional FTE in. It's really looking at what are we offering and how can we enhance some of the programs, or how can we enhance what the course offerings are, or different things of that nature. Now, we're always going to look at, when we talked about subtle increases, if we had a ton of kids at City High School express a great interest in industrial technology, that's something we're always going to look at and try to accommodate. We want to look at what the kids are interested in and use that. That's one of the first things we do. We start in January when kids first start requesting their courses and looking at what are the requests, do we have any unique pockets of information, and then that's how we start making decisions, because we want to base our staffing off what the kids are interested in, what they want to take. So that's where you get a little bit of the part of the CTE impact, but a lot of what we're trying to do related to the report card, as you're speaking to, Director Lingo, is it's what we're doing in the courses with a lot of the classes that we already have in place.
Then this is kind of my final question.
Yep.
This comes from an old salty middle school teacher himself. There's a reason I'm a former one. But so given the overlap of average class sizes, when you go to the enrollment report, they're roughly the same between our 3 secondary buildings. And I'm going to concentrate on middle school specifically. part of this happens to be surrounding, there was a nice cost study done by American Institutes of Research on where money is most effectively spent within the school districts in New Hampshire. So it was cost study and telling the state this is how you should fund your school districts. And one of the places where they talked about is middle school specifically because it's the hardest place to nudge students forward academically. And given that the free and reduced price lunch rate levels at North Central are 26%, 43.5% at Northwest, and 49.6% in academic year 24 at Southeast Middle School. Projecting this out, we have a pretty good idea, and even when you went to that one chart, you have a pretty good idea, again, of what our high schools and middle schools will look like in the next 5 years. And you can see that, and we do know that, especially on the southeast side, the east side and southeast and City High School, they just have a large amount of enrollment in both buildings. I mean, Southeast Middle School is coming pretty close to the same amount of students at Liberty High School. How does this, like, I look at the free and reduced price lunch rates, and we can go to these other rates of ELL. Much of them are overlapping. How does this frame out staffing decisions for this year, and does it frame it for the future? Because, I mean, there's just a very different demographics throughout our school district. And it's like, we pay attention and say that is something that we should pay attention to at elementary school, and then all of a sudden, now a lot of people that had students that would have been sixth graders this year at those elementary schools, getting those extra resources this year, all of a sudden are at our middle schools, and we're not doing any sort of differentiation in resources from the outlook. If I look at the classroom sizes, right? How does this shape the administration's view on the future of how we staff our elementary, our middle schools and high schools? Should it? If so, how? If not, why not? Those are the questions for it.
There's a few questions in there, Director Lingo, so I'll try to get them here. There was a couple prongs on that one. I think the short answer is yes. We look at that, and one of the reasons I clicked on this is we've maintained this is the same thing that for the elementaries, but we do this also for the secondary. So it's looking at each and every kid in each and every building. You'll actually see there's a little less red on this because it gets into a wider dispersion of students, so the averages look a little bit different. But I mean that is something we consistently look at. One of the things that's always really difficult when we put these charts, or when I put some of these charts up here, is you don't see some of the subtle things that the buildings do within the schedules to make a difference within classes. So when you're thinking about, okay, we know that this is going to be a Math 7 class, and we have a number of students that are coming in that have struggled in math that we've seen now as sixth graders, we're going to do so we're maybe going to let that 8th grade algebra class float up a little bit. So that's going to be on the top end of that aspirational class size, because we feel more comfortable that they may not need the same level of support. Our high schools do the same thing. What Brady has in his AP government class is going to look vastly different than what's going to be in a 9th grade algebra course, right? You're going to, oh gosh, I've done that twice now. But I think those are some of the things that it's hard to see here that we see when we work with the principals. One thing that I take pride in, and with both Lucas and Eliza, is working directly with our principals to know the needs in those buildings, to look at what our kids are asking about, to look at all the courses that they're interested in, what we need to do for the courses they take. When I reflected, and yes, it was very general in the presentation, when we look at what those core classes are at the middle school level, we feel good about where that class size is. And if we need to, one of the nice things, when you add a person into a middle school setting, and you were kind of referring to this, there is some efficiency there, because that's going to give you 6 more sections, which is going to have an influence across that whole subject area of reducing down class size. So a lot of times, even adding, we did that last year at Southeast when we had this kind of much larger than anticipated 6th grade class. We added one teacher in that was able to teach some English courses, made a huge difference for the overall class size, sixth grade. So those are some of the fluid pieces that we constantly work on. And that's why we start this work in legitimately as soon as we get back from winter break. And it's a constant conversation from now until, unfortunately, sometimes into, to Labor Day of what are we seeing, how many kids are showing up, what all of a sudden, because some of our buildings may all of a sudden have a huge number of kids that just show up. And now what do we need to do about that, or how we need to accommodate those needs?
Well, I was just going to say, it just made me think about kind of hearing you ask the question and then Nick respond to Mitch. I wonder if there's a way for us to try to visualize that better, right? Because I do think those things are happening. Like Nick gave a great example there of what might happen with an honors or an AP class and compared to a grade level standard class, right? And how the principals work on their staffing to manipulate that section size. And so I wouldn't want to characterize it as that we aren't allocating resources differently in those situations, because we are. But it's not being displayed in the data that you see all the time, or like when we give you those class size frequency charts, you can't really pull out those examples very readily for people to notice and see. So I don't have a great answer for that, but I'm sitting here thinking about how do we do that. It's a lot easier for us to talk about how we use the RAM at the secondary level and do that with support staff or administrative staff and try to account for those differences, right? That's easy visual. We can give you those readily. But maybe just even having some explainable examples, right, that we could point to in that sense, so people do know how we're trying to maybe handle those situations different based on some of the demographic makeup of the school. Nick had a good example there from Southeast, an intentional effort we did at the beginning of the school year there to look at some of those section sizes that, again, wouldn't be seen in just an overall frequency chart across the board. We wouldn't understand necessarily how a demographic of student is maybe experiencing different class sizes at Southeast than a different demographic of student. For one example. So I do think about that. And so, yes, it does frame our staffing decisions every single year. It's more of a matter of, I wonder how we quantify that and can kind of show that to you and also to the public moving forward. So I think that's a good question for us to take back and work through. And I thought I made another note here while you were talking too. But I would say just the other challenge maybe in it, when I think about it, kind of the flip side of the unique challenge of the secondary model is, remember, we're still having to offer that whole breadth of the curriculum, right? So that just takes a certain standard staffing level to do that breadth of it. And so even though we're all familiar with our RAM levels at the elementary, and you look at those examples, we know, there's not huge differences in the RAM 1 through 3 right now, if you really look at some of those section sizes. So to think about cascading an impactful decision or model across the secondary even becomes more complex to do that. And so I think that's some of our challenge, when you're in a tighter budget situation, then it does become more nuanced about where we can make an impact and where we do display those resources. But I think the takeaway is just then, again, just to keep repeating myself, how do we try to show that and explain that?
Thank you.
I just have maybe some thoughts to move forward, so not questions for you, Nick.
All right, thanks.
Because as we're still looking at big picture FMP 2.0, we've got a facility study hanging out there. So when we look at our aspirational class sizes, particularly at the elementary level, we need to make sure that the physical spaces match those numbers. And that's the comments that I've heard is, I've got 32 kids, but I've got 27 hangers and cubbies, in my room. So how am I supposed to handle 32 kids? So we are doing that work, looking at the facility study and FMP, but I think we need to try and match up those physical spaces with these numbers.
Thank you. Now I'm going to get your title right. Chief Human Resources Officer Proud. I had it written down.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a lot of information. It was very helpful. Food for thought. Certainly, I need to sort of process some of what you said. And I appreciate the part about trying to figure out to show what we do at the middle school and high school in terms of accounting for differences in the buildings in terms of need. So I think that's a very good question to think about how to show that better.
Yeah, I think that's something that's very doable. Just as you mentioned that, Superintendent Degner, I think that's something we could pull, looking at specific courses where our principals make some really strategic efforts to make a difference in those classes. I think that'd be something we could easily do.
Yeah. Any other comments? Thank you.
I would just add that we might consider asking the legislature for additional funding so we could
Yes. Oh, I know. Yeah.
have more teachers, right?
I almost wonder
Yeah,
if
first
it's-
we need to know what
yeah.
the funding's going to be, Charlie.
Right.
I'm sorry?
We need to know what it's going to be before we can ask for more.
I think I know we will need to ask for more.
Yes, agreed. Okay, next we have two action items. The first one is the operations life cycle budget. I'll open it up for comments on that. Comments or questions?
Good. One of the overarching ones that I have is there's $1 million for land purchase in there. Is this kind of a just in case if we get something offered, or what's going on?
Case looks like he's ready to take it, so
Give
go
our
ahead, buddy.
enrollment report.
Yes, just in case, or actually more at the point, it's part of FMP 2.0. PEPL is one of the funding sources along with SAVE that's backed FMP 2.0, and there's been a line item in that current document for land purchases, and so this is the draw from PEPL to help fund that part of the current FMP projects.
Thank you.
To your question, but isn't just in case, we do not have an upcoming recommendation for,
Okay.
For a land purchase.
It's just one of those ones that we face often, especially with the discussions last fall, and then I look at the enrollment report that we had a few weeks ago, and so it's one that always hangs out there with people, and I can't blame them. And then the other one on the instrument budget, always happy to see the instrument budget in there. Always like it to be as much as possible. But the question I have on this is, how is this allocated throughout the buildings? Is it some metric of participation between the buildings, or is there a life cycle of instruments? So if they find like they have a bunch of oboes that are dying, not dying, but like 50
Killing the oboes.
oboes or something like that, is that how we allocate it, or?
It's some of both. And so it is life cycled out about when we would do instrument replacement. And then, of course, the way we factor the amount of replacement we do would be based on participation numbers. So it's really trying to build a model based on participation, but then also replacing those instruments on a recurring cycle like we do books or any of the other things you see in our operation life cycle.
Thank you.
I would add, it is kind of strange because it comes from our operational side, so we do call on some expertise. So it's not Ben and Jared, or now Kurt sitting down at the physical plant and Adam doing this. We defer to the district music coordinator, plays a really big part in those discussions about when we do make those moves regarding instruments that Superintendent Degner talked about.
I did notice that number has been increasing the last couple of years, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. I'm really glad to see that. And if it needs to be increased, I hope we can increase it, yeah. In terms of, I would just say that oboes are too proud to actually die. Not oboist, but oboes.
Thank you. I will always remember that. Director Eastham. Any other comments? Okay, we need a motion to approve.
I move that we approve the operations lifecycle budget.
Second.
Board Secretary Colvin, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Thank you. Our next action item is the 500 policies that Director Eastone talked about earlier. Eastone, sorry. I know, that's what I was doing, yeah. Do we have further comments or questions on those? Is there a motion?
Motion to pass the 500 policies. Is that the correct motion? Is it? Can it be?
Approve, maybe?
Approve, motion to approve the 500 policies.
Second.
Board Secretary Colvin, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Legislative update. Superintendent Degner.
Yeah, I'd first note that we have our next legislative forum this Friday at 4 o'clock right here in this room. And so we'll look forward to talking to our legislators at that time. Several things that happened towards the end of last week, and then bills we're monitoring this week. School funding still stuck with SSA. You know, we have the two competing proposals of the 2% and the 2.25%. The Senate took floor action on notable one related to student grooming. You may remember we even talked about that in our own policy work last year, and so they're trying to tighten up the definition of that to give school teams and districts direction. They also talked about the creation of school safety assessment teams, which you're familiar. We have a care assessment process here, so we feel like that would fold nicely into the work that we've already established there and give some code reference and requirement behind it. The math initiative that came from the governor's bill, that seems to be moving along. We anticipate that to pass, and you'll see math plans similar to how we've had literacy plans. Cell phone restriction policy, the piece we've been watching there most closely is the parent exemption, and we feel like there's some pretty good, I guess, boundaries around that about what that would be applied for situations outside of 504s and special education. Other ones I noticed here, there's a DEI bill that is moving through that I think we anticipate passing. Last time we were together, I spoke about the Dear Colleague letter and some of the impact there. So that would kind of be the local law that we would need to follow that would speak similarly to the guidance we received in the Dear Colleague letter. You've probably seen in the news some of the non-public student extracurricular eligibility that would require public districts to allow private school students to participate in those extracurricular activities that their school didn't offer. We anticipate that to go through. A problematic one that we spent some time talking about this morning was House File 851 that you might want to spend some time with. It talks about changing some requirements on the state level for what could be included in school lunches. There's some lack of clarity there about how that would, if the state would be able to obtain a federal waiver, and even if they obtain the federal waiver, what kind of potential loss of federal food and nutrition funds would come with that, or if they didn't, if they changed the requirements and could not obtain a federal waiver, then what kind of funds would we lose from the federal government for that? It seems to be driven by the pork producers, the cattlemen, talking about changing some requirements about protein, dairy, fruits, and so. We don't really want to see competing requirements at the state and federal level that would then, of course, affect federal funding. There was a subcommittee meeting last week. I'm sorry, I don't have the current status on it today about management fund for school security. We'd be supportive of that for us to be able to access the management fund for school security. Some of you had asked me questions about this throughout the week, and what I was able to find out, it would deal with school safety and security infrastructure, including weapons detection systems and door monitoring systems. So some of the actual infrastructure upgrades would also allow for salaries of security officials to be paid out of that fund, which would be a definite new lens on the management fund aspect of being able to fund those things. So I think we're supportive of that. It was, or I don't think, I know we're supportive of that, definitely for the physical upgrades that we would want to make at our different buildings, whether it's those examples I gave or otherwise, anytime we can tap another funding source, knowing how expensive that is to do in a large district across multiple campuses. And this was something that was actually requested by the Davenport School District. So that seems to be getting some traction, which we're a little bit surprised about since it does deal with the management fund, and usually the bounds on that are pretty tight. The property tax, the implication for that when they talk about property tax for us is, again, what happens in the management fund and how far we could increase our expenses in the management fund. The more recent explanation that's been provided on those property tax bills makes us feel better about the 180% they're talking about, that could increase because it does include things like maximum deductible, insurance premiums, early retirement plan obligations, that those are all acceptable reasons to grow that. There was a lot of lack of clarity about what those property tax bills were actually saying on the onset. So that's one that we'll continue to stay informed with. It obviously directly impacts our cities and counties greatly too. I'm not sure if that'll continue to move forward. That seems like a pretty complex onion to put together. for the state legislature about how to redo property tax. But there's a multitude of other things that are still moving or still being discussed. Those were the ones I pulled out of kind of the legislative update as far as the highlight. But if you have questions or comments on other ones, be happy to try to answer those or get back to you on an answer. But we do have our next forum Friday at 4.
Any other questions or comments on legislative issues?
That was plenty.
Yeah. With that, we'll move on to agenda setting. We have the Operations Committee. We'll be meeting at 5 o'clock, I think. Yes, 5 o'clock on April 8th.
What, is that when we're doing the arts?
I wanted to do that, but before we come back to you guys, we wanted a chance to try to meet with each of the building staffs about things that were in that report and what we were going to potentially recommend back to you guys. So we'd actually like to wait until the 22nd is our second meeting in April to do that. So we might need to squeeze in a work session along with P&G that evening to wait until that Tuesday. So I'm without a topic for operations right now, Director Lingo.
I don't have a topic either, so.
Okay.
If anybody,
We'll
if
work
anybody-
and then communicate with you about what that could be. So we talked about it today and did not have one to suggest yet tonight. But other items in April, Vice President Abraham, we are going to plan to come back with you on cell phones for that meeting and provide an update about how our cell phone policy implementation's been going. We want to talk about Center for Innovation student programming for the following year and the plans that we have moving along for providing student programming at the Center for Innovation. We're going to work to have a special education update also for that first April meeting. And then finally, we'll have the next step in our certified budget process as well. So those were the 4 that I had on my list that we'd be targeting for that first April meeting.
I'm not looking at April, but just a suggestion for maybe sometime this summer, an overview of what we talked about earlier on staffing the secondary buildings.
Sure, come back to that and
Yeah.
try to
When
have
we're
that
more
some
in a
more.
lull
Sure.
of things to discuss.
Yep.
A lull? I don't know.
We'll never, well, you know.
Yeah.
Any other comments about the agenda? Any parking lot items? Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.